Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please download the app and share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And if you like what we do, Joe and I post all these interviews on social media. And we also have our social media show, which we do Sundays, sometime usually in the middle of the day where we go live. We get into a whole lot of trouble. So if you like the content, help us get out to a wider audience, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. So today we're welcoming back to the program someone we're proud to say is a friend of the show, Joseph Pearce. And again, we say all the time, when you're talking about manhood, manliness, what it means to be a real man, you are going into the breach in the modern culture. And we love having Joseph on because he always ties it in with literature, great literature. Today, we're going to be discussing his new book, Great Books for Good Men, Reflections on Literature and Manhood. Now, it's available at Ignatius Press. So I'll post a link in the description. We'll take you right to the website and you can buy it there. Father Fessio would always want me to say, make sure you tell your local Catholic bookstore to buy a few copies, put it on the shelf. We promise they're not going to stay there very long. And I'm sure it's available at other places where Joseph will let us know. Now, many of you know Joseph Pearce. Joseph Pearce is a very prolific author. He's been on EWTN and so many other outlets. He is the author of numerous literary studies, including Literary Converts, The Quest for Shakespeare, and Shakespeare on Love, as well as biographies of Oscar Wilde, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He is the general editor of the Ignatius Critical Edition series. Joseph Pearce, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe, our brother.
It's great to be with you, the three Joes again, huh?
There you
Love
go.
it.
Gotta
Love it.
love it. So, Joe, I'm going to throw it, Joseph Resinello, I'm going to throw it over to you. We'll get rocking.
We always start with a prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother, the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. As Joe Pasil rightfully said, we're going to be talking about Joseph Pearce's book, Great Books for Good Men. I mean, obviously, the topic of what a good man is very important. But I mean, currently, we don't even know what a man is. Our society doesn't even know what a man is. We're talking about good men. That it should be as basic as the day is long. What a man is, and we don't even know what that is, which is crazy. But we're going to focus on good men because obviously the word good is very subjective in our society today, and I think we have to air that out. So, a good place to start, Joseph Pearce, is the definition. What is the correct definition of a good man?
Well, the correct definition of a good man is very, very easy. Jesus Christ. In other words, that the perfect human person is Christ, and we're called to be as much like Christ as possible. Insofar as you're trying to be Christ-like, we are trying to be good men. Insofar as we have a relationship with Jesus Christ, we'll become better men. And so it's the quest for goodness and truth and beauty is to be found in the person of Jesus Christ. In other words, all of us are sinners, so we can't claim to be good in the absolute sense, right? As Christ can, but we are called to be like him. And in other words, we're called to be as good as we can, which is only possible with a life of grace, which is only possible with a relationship with Christ. So a good man is one who wants to take up his cross and follow Christ.
No, absolutely, Joseph Pearce. I think it's important too, and I love your comments on this because on the one hand, we can't seem to define what a good man is, or a strong man, or anything like that. And on the other hand, I think I'm going to speak personally. Sometimes I have to remember what you just said because a good man, a strong man, doesn't mean that you can bench press 300 pounds, even though maybe you can. Doesn't mean that you're sinless because you're not. It doesn't mean that you don't have faults because you do. But we have to keep in mind what you just said. Because if we wait for ourselves to be perfect, we're never going to get there because we're never going to be perfect in this life. Talk about that a little bit. I think you know where I'm going with that.
So basically, that one of the things about great literature, and one of the things I address in this book, is that one of the definitions of classical definitions of who we are as human persons is Homo viator, which means man on a journey, or man on a pilgrimage, or man on a quest. So each of us is on the quest for heaven. That's the purpose of life. But the problem with that is that we also simultaneously Homo superbus, which means proud man. The Latin word for pride is superbia, Homo superbus. And the proud man doesn't want to go on the quest, doesn't want to go on the pilgrimage. So this battle takes place in each individual human heart between the call to be good, the call to follow Jesus Christ, and the desire to do our own thing instead, and not go on the quest, go somewhere else, or go nowhere in particular, just hang out. So that struggle between the good man we're called to be, Homo viator, the man on the quest for heaven, and the bad man, the proud man we're tempted to be, is a struggle that goes on in our hearts. And we can't win that battle without the help of God and neighbor. So the love of God, love of neighbor is essential for us to win that civil war that's taking place inside our hearts.
I agree with that.
Joseph,
I just want to touch on this for a second, because that's so on point, but that is such a revolutionary concept in this culture. Dare I say, if you said that at a cocktail party with educated people, they think you're crazy. I mean, that is just not the way people think, particularly like high achieving educated people. They'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Like, how do we get the culture to point in that direction? Obviously, this book is one of those things that we're going to talk about how you break those short stories down and get people thinking in that mindset. And the great books do that as well, which we're going to also discuss. But just in the practical sense on Main Street, where we live, because what you said is the purpose of life, but we are so far from that. I'm talking about like when you go to the post office. We're not talking about running in circles like these type of circles or these type of conversations. Um, People are just not even close to thinking in this respect. And frankly, the road that they're on closes in on them and they wind up destroying themselves in the process. Talk a little bit about that, how we mainstream this idea.
That's a great point. The point is, of course, that pride is self-destructive and it destroys others. It's a lose-lose. The way I normally try to put it to a broader audience is there are only two types of people in the world. Ultimately, there are those who lay down their lives for the beloved, for the other, and there are those who lay down the life of the beloved of the other for themselves. Simple as that. That basically, do you lay down your life for the other person, which is an act of love? Or do you lay down the life of the other person for yourself, which is the act of pride? And basically, if you choose the latter, first of all, you're going to make lots of other people unhappy. And at the end of the day, you're going to make yourself unhappy because you have no one to love because you refuse to love anybody. So the point is, it's a lose. The choice of pride, of sacrificing others for the self, is a lose-lose. It makes you miserable, it makes other people miserable. The only way ultimately to have a world where people are happy is if we become self-sacrificial towards each other. We learn how to love in the Christian understanding of the word, which is to lay down your life for the beloved. It's not about a feeling, it's about a commandment to rationally choose to sacrifice ourselves.
You know what's funny, Joseph Pearce, um, and if you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we're joined by Joseph Pearce, a good friend of the show. We're proud to say, great books for good men, reflections on literature and manhood. Even the grand poobah atheist himself, Richard Dawkins, admitted recently. He said, "Well, I much rather live in a Christian society." And I want to tell him you could convert, Richard. You could jump on in. The water's good. But even he admits it, that even his own worldview, which does not include what you just said, he understands and recognizes that the Christian ethos is one of self-sacrifice. That yes, I'm not living selfishly, even though atheists would say that you ought to. I think, but he even admitted a Christian culture is a better culture. I'd much rather live in that culture. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you can see it in practice, right? That the cultures where it's all about worshipping the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I are the most miserable cultures in history. It's called decadence, right? And decadence, and you go right back to Plato. You get decadence ultimately leads to anarchy. Anarchy, once you've got anarchy, what people want then is, if there's no law, they want and it's still, everything's being basically taken over by gangs of various sorts with no law and order. Then what you want is the most powerful gang leader to take over, to establish some sort of semblance of law. Then you get tyranny, right? And you have to work hard through self-sacrifice to get something like a just society. So you have to fight the tyranny. But then if you don't ensure that you have this self-sacrificial philosophy at the heart of your politics, you end up again with the selfishness leading to anarchy, which leads to tyranny. And it's that's that vicious circle and vicious cycle that we see being played out throughout the whole of human history. We now have 3,000 years of experience, that we can draw on here to see that this is what happens if you will not have a society which loves self-sacrificially. You will have society heading towards anarchy, and the consequence of that is a recoil towards tyranny.
Joe Resinello is okay. I want to stay here for
Please.
a second. Okay. So, do you believe Joe and I are of the view that because what we're hearing a lot of lately, particularly Bishop Barron and others, that we need to pursue the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. Obviously, in the pursuit of those things, we consume art. Okay, great literature being amongst the great art that we look at. So, in the pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful, will move us to want to pursue holiness, to grow in holiness. So talk about how the writers in this book that you've written lead men to pursue that holiness.
Yeah, again, so basically, what great literature shows us is what it is to be truly human, both in the good and the bad sense. So, great literature shows us that this struggle between the homo viator, we're called to be, the pilgrim man on a quest for heaven, which we're called to be, and the proud man that wants to do something else instead. But the other aspect of humanity, of who we are as human persons, that great literature shows us, is the Greek word for man, anthropos, which means he who looks up in wonder. And if we don't look up in wonder, we become cynical. As Oscar Wilde said, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. If you're in the gutter and you're face down, right, there's nothing for you except despair and thoughts of suicide. You have to look up. And when you look up, as Samwise Gamgee says in The Lord of the Rings, above all shadows rides the sun, right? You see that there's a light that transcends and supersedes whatever sinful darkness we're in. That's the light of God's presence in creation and in our hearts. And so you need to look up, anthropos. So again, the great literature shows us how to go forward towards heaven. And what you do that, first of all, by struggling by the grace of God, but you also have to keep your eyes on heaven. You have to be looking up. Edification, right? Like a cathedral, you need to look up, because if you're looking down, you're going to just find yourself very desperate and despondent, because the world's a mess without that light. So if you're not keeping your eye on the light, all you're going to see is the shadow.
Thank you for that. Joseph Pearce is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Great book for good men, Reflections on Literature and Manhood. Of course, it's available at Ignatius Press. We would also ask you to ask your local Catholic bookstore to order a few copies, put them on the shelves. Joseph, real quick before I hand it over to Joe Resinello, where else could our audience members buy the book? And by the way, where they could find you, whether it's social media or website, whatever the case might be.
Well, the best one-stop place for me is my personal website, jpearce.co. And actually, all of my books are up there in the book section. And this particular book, all the other books, it will take you directly to the link to the publisher's website. So, I don't just publish with one publisher, I publish with several. But this is the one stop, and I have my own website and my own blogs. I post 4 new podcasts every week for the Inner Sanctum on my site. So, yeah, check me out, jpearce.co.
Awesome. Joseph Resinello.
You mentioned in the beginning of the discussion that Jesus is the good man. Couldn't agree with you more on that. However, when we go to Mass as Catholics, we see our priest, and he is in persona Christi. Tell us how Geoffrey Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales basically can tell us what a good priest is. As a father, I should be able to look at that priest and point to my, sons and say, "Do you see that man on the altar? That's who you should be like, because he is in persona Christi, like Christ." How does Chaucer tell us that?
Well, in the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales, he gives us he gives us this overview of all the various pilgrims on their way to Canterbury. Most of them are miserable, a menagerie of miserable sinners, corrupt, including corrupt church, monks and friars and nuns. But in the midst of it, he gives us this picture of a poor parson of a town, and it's the best depiction and description that I know of what a good, solid, holy priest on his way to heaven looks like. And of course, it's about embracing poverty. It's about not seeking any ambition even within the church, right? Just to be happy being a poor parson of a town, on foot, walking to the furthest reaches to every one of his parishioners, irrespective of how bad the weather is. This is a man who completely empties himself for his parishioners, and in his love for God, that he can give himself fully. So again, it's only about 30 or so lines, and this is the brilliance of great literature. In this 30 or so lines, we get this image of the perfect priest.
So, Joseph, let me ask you this. If you're just joining us, Joseph Pearce is with us at the front line with Joe and Joe. So the book itself, it's as Joe mentioned earlier, so it's broken down into a number of short reflections. Talk about the format for our audience.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to have to warn you. There's a very bad pun and very bad joke about to happen. So I thought I'd better warn you before I hit you with it. So the genesis of this book was Exodus, in the sense that the idea was from Exodus 90, the men's group, which I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will know. And they asked me, could I write 48 brief reflections, only about 500 words, which makes this is not a very unintimidating book, right? So it's 48 reflections, about 500 words each on literature and manhood. So I was very happy to do that, and I did that, and then I asked them, could I, after they published it on their website, could I assemble these together and ask Ignatius Press to publish it, and they were happy that I did so, and that's the genesis of the book.
Exodus 90s is rough. I mean, and I'm seriously considering, doing it. I did it once before. I didn't quite get through it all, to be honest. But if you really want to, as a man, if you really want to start breaking some nasty habits, and we all have them, whatever they might be, okay. Exodus 90 is a really good program, and moreover, it's doable. See, that's the thing. I love your comments on this. It's daunting, it's challenging, but it's eminently doable, and all it takes is an act of the will to say, as both of you were just describing, I want to do that. Let's say if you're talking about, I want to be more Christ-like. I want to tell my son, be like the priest, the good priest. I want to do that. It takes an act of the will. Talk about that, Joseph. We have to make decisions to move in these positive directions.
Yeah, actually, and Joe, to disagree with you slightly, if I may, because we're friends and we can argue without quarreling. In Beowulf, for instance, like one of the reflections in this is Beowulf. It's the powerlessness of the warrior. The thing about Beowulf is he's the most powerful warrior who's ever lived. He's the physically strongest, and he has this sword that's never been defeated in battle. So what we have here is the image of the strongest man with the best technology. And when he comes up against the demon, Grendel's mother, he's powerless. And the point of the story, because it's written by a Benedictine monk, is to say, no, we can't just get to heaven. We can't be like Jesus Christ purely through the power of the will. That we have to be on our knees and ask for the grace of God to help us. But this is where I'm not disagreeing with you, that we also have to accommodate that with our will. In other words, we have to will for the help necessary. So yet we're absolutely we're not zombies that are just being sort of possessed. So we are having a living, loving relationship with our Lord, but without his help, we cannot do it. It's certainly something as tough as Exodus 90. If we don't approach it prayerfully, then we will fall flat on our face. Again, the wonderful philosopher Bono of U2, in his song Mysterious Ways, if you want to kiss the sky, you have to learn how to kneel, right? So that's the whole point. That's the paradox, is that we have to recognize our weakness if we're going to be strong.
It's funny. I'm going to hand it over to Joe. But even though my enthusiasm for you too has waned over the years, but I'm glad you mentioned that line because we've said that many times. It's a true line. If you want to kiss the sky, better learn how to kneel. And then he says, "On your knees, boy." And kind of like I try to keep that in the back of my head. So, Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
I just want to opine on what you said because I think it's very true. St. Paul tells us, when we are weak, therefore we're strong. I find that in the confessional, when we expose our weaknesses, that's where the grace of God floods into our soul. We all have them, and the devil tries to prevent us from exposing those weaknesses. They could be embarrassing moments in our lives. We all have them. And that's how God comes to us in our weakness through the sacrament and through grace. But then you mentioned Exodus 90. I've never done it, but I've had throughout the years of practicing my own faith, used ascetic practices, fasting, at different points, for many years. It could become an idol. I use this I'm just sharing this from my perspective. I am also by nature a disciplined person, but then it becomes almost like a feat of strength. Like you do something that's very hard and then it becomes an idol and you have to watch that. I have to watch that. That's why sometimes, and this is something I'm going to start doing more, like say during Advent, which is coming up, or Lent, Sunday's a day to relax. You don't have to beat yourself up on Sunday. God says, okay, you did this all week. Now it's Sunday. Relax. That's, I think, a good thing because it doesn't become, talk about that a little bit because I think you could fall into both those traps, not exposing yourself from the weakness aspect of all our lives, but then where we are strong, it becomes an idol, and that prevents us from getting close to God as well.
So I'd like to comment on two things about that. The latter part first, and then the other part about our discipline becoming an idol, our strength becoming something that becomes an idol. I'll talk about it in a moment. But for instance, our family, we've been going for many years. We have a preference for the traditional Latin Mass. I'm not a mad trad.
I love it.
I'm happy to go to the Novus Ordo but we prefer the traditional Mass. So that's noon. And that used to be on my, I didn't used to like the fact it's noon because, it's right in the middle of the day and, you can't do anything else. But now I love it because it's right in the day. You can't do anything else. So we have a very quiet, relaxing Sunday morning because, we've got to go to Mass eventually, but we don't have to hurry, right? We take our time. And then by the time Mass is over, we get back home, it's already, 2:30 in the afternoon, right? Can't plan to do anything else much. So you have a nice, relaxing afternoon, So the Mass is the centerpiece of the day. And the rest of it really is relaxing around that centerpiece. So I actually love that now, although I didn't. Now, as regards strength being an idol, one thing I practiced since about the time I became a Catholic, a long time ago now, is what I call a healthy trinity. So every day I try to find time for intellectual fitness, spiritual fitness, and physical fitness. Right. So I liken it to like an equilateral triangle, right? To try to find the same amount of time each day for those three aspects of the healthy trinity. So I've been going to the gym for, I try to go Monday to Friday. That doesn't normally happen like this in a way, but let's say I average 3 times a week for 30 so years, 35 years, whatever it's been now since I was in my 20s. It's very easy for especially when I was younger, I'm too old now anyway, but to get that bench press up, you can do the extra £5, the extra £10, keep pushing, competing with yourself. And then instead of just becoming physical health as part of spiritual and intellectual health, part of your moving towards heaven, it becomes something which you're fixated on. It's become an idol in its own right. It's not anymore a means to an end. It's become an end in itself. So you do have to watch. Good things can become poisoned by pride, and if this becomes something which is we're prideful about, then we need to sort of detox it. So to be healthy and go for physical fitness without that physical fitness becomes something that we become obsessive about. And everything else has to be put to one side to make sure we're running that 5 miles a day, or we're hitting that next target in the gym or whatever.
Joseph Pearce joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Great books for good men, reflections on literature and manhood. Joseph, we have about a minute and a half before the break. I have a question out of curiosity. Now, I'm sure that this is going to be an answer that has or a question that has probably many answers. But who in your view, from your reading, and obviously you've read more great literature than most people, who is your favorite character? Like if you're putting it in the context of what we're talking about real, authentic manhood. Who's your favorite character?
My favorite character in literature? Well, that's a great question. That is a great question. Yeah, you've asked me a tough one. I'm going to have to think about that, quite frankly. I'm going to give that a thought during the break, and I'll come back if I can answer that question after the break. I'd be grateful. I've got hundreds of, as I'm thinking, dozens of names from various great West literature entering my mind, but trying to sift and sort them out as to which one is preeminent is a tough one. I'm going to have that. Yeah, and I say it's very good for my humility to be asked questions I can't answer. So thank you, Joe.
All right. I will throw this at you, and then we'll go to the break. My wife works for a great school. Okay, she's a teacher. She's a first grade teacher to the charter school here. But they're basically modeled they model the education on the classic Catholic model, even though it's not a Catholic school. And one of the things that my wife has to do, and all the teachers, they're assigned by the headmaster and the administration to have to read. They could choose what they want to read, but they have to read a great book, and then they sit around. They do it, I think, twice a semester, and they talk about it. So, because my wife asked me for help, and it's been helpful to me, is I told her, so well, why don't you read Dante's Inferno? Because I said I haven't read it in a while, and if I'm going to help you, it's good for me to revisit it. And she has Anthony Esselin's recent translation, which is fantastic. And so I'm going to say, and I haven't read as much as you, but I've read a lot, um, because I find myself in Dante, and a lot of the things that Dante in the Inferno, and then we'll get to Purgatorio and Paradiso, but a lot of what Dante is going through, I see myself in that. So having read Shakespeare and everything else, I'm gonna say Dante Alighieri is in the top three. Let's put it like that.
Joe, he was one of the names that was figuring me, and of course, it's Dante, the character in the story, as distinct from Dante, the writer of the story, because we talked about characters. And yeah, as an everyman figures, that he's a marvelous, and he's certainly up there. And I may even find myself agreeing with you. And certainly, if I can't think of anybody else, I'm just going to say yes.
All right, we're gonna come back. Take a quick break. We're at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network on the front line with Joe and Joe, with Joseph Pearce discussing his new book, Great Books for Good Men: Reflections on Literature and Manhood. So stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Rossinello, and we are way in the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network with Joseph Pearce. We're discussing his new book, Great Books for Good Men: Reflections on Literature and Manhood. You could go to Joseph's website, which is jpearce.co, which will have a link to the publisher, to Ignatius, where you can buy the book, and you can see Joseph's blog. You could put in your email, and you'll get an email with Joseph's blog. I know that because that's what I do. And we need, particularly men, particularly Catholic men. We need people like Joseph Pearce, who is offering us a means by which we can move our souls by diving into the great books and great art and great literature. So we're very appreciative for that. I'm going to throw it over to Joe Rossinello.
Let's talk a little bit about Kipling's poem, If. It's a powerful poem, and it's funny. In my social media feed, it comes up fairly often with a picture. You may have seen it. It's a man. He looks like an Italian man on the New York City subway with his little son who's like sleeping. And he has such a troubled look on his face. And he's a blue collar man. Like it looks like he was almost like driving a bus, like a bus, an old school bus driver's uniform. And under it is the poem. And it's a perfect picture for the poem. Tell us about this poem because I find it to be, it's not like what people think. It's not like the champion, or it's not like, you know, the machismo of so many like images of what man is supposed to be that's like portrayed in songs or in movies. It paints a different picture, but it truly encapsulates what a father, what a husband, and what a man is. Tell us about that poem, Joseph.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm going to be making enemies of both of you because it's my turn now to disagree with you,
Oh, it's okay.
Joe.
Go.
No, I mean, my brief reflection on that poem, "If" by Rudyard Kipling, is a marvelous poem, one that my father used to recite to me when I was a kid. So I sort of grew up with that as a model of manhood. It's a model of it is up to a point machismo because it's basically there's no mention of Christ, there's no mention of service or it you know so it starts off very very well, right? You have what it takes to be a man, but then it says if you can put all of your own on one throw of the dice, in other words, that gambling's okay, and if you lose, then just be a man enough with a stiff upper lip not to complain about it. Well, sorry, that's not going deep enough, brother. Just being able to take a blow on the chin because you've lost all your money gambling is not what it takes to be a man. And it's a short poem, so there could and should have been other things in it that aren't in it, and there are things in it that quite frankly not only have nothing to do with being a man, are counterproductive. I'm not saying we shouldn't have put $10 on the Kentucky Derby or something, but obviously gambling is something that if we're not careful becomes a big destructive issue. So it's typical Kipling. He's a British imperialist conservative type figure from the Victorian age, and it's that sort of Victorian understanding what it is to be a man, but it's not a fully Christian understanding what it is to be a man. So that's part of the reflection there. It's not good enough. That's the key thing. If I can just say one other quick thing, I was on a tangent on that, which I found very fascinating. When my mother was still alive, I took her on the Elvis pilgrimage, right, to Graceland,
Love
and
it.
we went to Tupelo, the two-room shack where Elvis was raised as a kid, and I was there, and I couldn't believe it. Above the bed in one of the two rooms in this shack was "If" by Rudyard Kipling, right, and I was thinking, what on earth is that doing? The 1930s Mississippi, it was the poorest state in the Union. It was the Great Depression. Elvis is a poor kid on the wrong side of the tracks. And it's a poem by Kipling. But then I said, what's that doing? That seems so out of place. And the guide there said, no, on the contrary, this was taught in the schools that Elvis was gone to at the time. And this was something that was very part of the education. And I thought, Chesterton says the coming peril is standardization by a low standard. And I was thinking, think about that now. How many kids in public schools in Mississippi or anywhere else for that matter are being taught, great poetry rather than just dumbed down relevant political correctness, and it just shows how far we've gone. The poorest state of the Union, Great Depression decade, and they're actually learning great poetry.
Maybe
It's funny.
Kipling could have learned from Elvis and ate a few fried peanut butter banana sandwiches. It probably would have brought him down a notch or two.
The Elvis diet is not something any of us should be advocating. I don't think.
You're funny, Joseph Pearce joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Just to tell you, there's a reason why Apocalypse Now is my favorite movie, and one of the reasons why, and it ties into what we're talking about literature. The whole movie is just infused with all these allusions. So it's the wasteland, it's Heart of Darkness, it's Dante. The scene on the river by the bridge where the soldiers are in the river begging to get on the boat. It's Dante's Inferno. It's all lighting off and alluding to all of these great works of literature. And the reason why I bring it up, because you triggered a thought in my head. We've come just in movie making, all right? And I know you're a movie guy too. There's like movie making has just become so insipid. And I look at a movie like Apocalypse Now, where obviously John Milius and Francis Ford Coppola gave a lot of thought to that script. Those things are not there by accident. And it makes a great work of art. No, it's not just going to the movies when you go see Apocalypse Now. And movies used to be that way. And we've strayed. So I don't, I used to, Joseph, I used to go to the movies by myself when I was a kid. I get in the car on a Sunday afternoon, I go see a movie, right? And that's when movies were good. And it's the same thing with literature. And education. It's just so dumbed down now. Whereas you juxtapose what's let's say being produced now with I think a masterpiece like Apocalypse Now, and you see how far we gone. I love your thoughts on that.
Absolutely correct. So, one of the I think I'll talk about this in the section on Chesterton in the book, but one of my favorite aphorisms of Chesterton, when he does say that the coming peril is standardization by a low standard, and that was he was writing that in about 1930. So actually about 1920, I think. No, but it's about late 20s. So almost a century ago now. And that's so much. That was the case then. It's been much more in that century since then. That we're almost teaching our kids now to grunt and not be able to actually have an articulate conversation either with themselves or with others. And that's basically where we're at now. We've deprived generations of people of the ability to be able to think clearly and express themselves clearly to others. And that's why what's the if you can't, if you know you're not happy, but you have no way of trying to explain to yourself why you're not happy, or to talk about why you're not happy to other people because you've been rendered inarticulate by your bad education, that's what leads to frustration and anger and despair and all the things we're seeing happening in our culture now as a consequence of people that know that they're miserable and can't work out why.
No, exactly right. I'm going to hand it over to Joe. I'm actually blessed in a way because I don't wear my Catholic faith on my sleeve, but everybody knows I'm Catholic and I work in a restaurant setting. So, I encounter like young guys, young men all the time. They're either, server assistants and the young servers and things like that. And they know I'm Catholic. And I'm blessed because a lot of them will ask me questions pertaining to what you just said. They've not been, not because Joe and I were so highly educated, but it was different 40 or 50 years ago than it is now. We did read the great books in high school. We were encouraged in college, and these kids they want to know more about the good, the true, the beautiful. And because they know I'm Catholic, they certainly want to know more about Christ. And I'm blessed in that way that they'll come and they'll ask me, I'm an older guy, and they'll say, Joe, what do you think about this? And of course, I could tell them about my own experiences, which are not exemplary of a Catholic man, in my younger life. And they relate to that, but they do want it, Joseph. I will say that. They know they've been cheated on many levels, and they are looking for that transcendence. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
Let's talk about Hillary Belloc, faith versus fear. I think in the life of every man, you have both. We have faith. We could obviously have faith in ourselves, but that's limited. Obviously, there's fear. Going into marriage, being open to life as a Catholic, there's fear. You know, uh, it doesn't make sense. Like, I have 5 children. How are you going to educate them? I don't know. To be honest with you, when it comes to college, like we're going to do our best, but at the end of the day, there's a fear element. I had a conversation with a friend of mine at work. Uh, and he has 2 children, and to be honest, they're very, very intelligent. And he's just like, I don't know how I'm going to educate them. I'm like, if I thought like that, I'd run into the ocean screaming. Like I just trust God, but there's that balance. How does Belloc bridge the gap between faith and fear?
Yeah, so the meditation, if you like, the contemplation on that tension, was prompted by a poem by Belloc called Twelfth Night. And that poem basically is he's all alone in the dark. And you have to see this metaphorically, right? So obviously a story, but how does this apply to the broader question you've just talked about? Our own role as fathers and husbands, etc. So he's in a dark wood by himself, and there's no one around. And then he hears this singing. And in the dark wood, then there's this company go past, and they're singing, and you don't know, are they elves or what are they? And he's saying they sang a song I used to know. I think it's Benedicamus Domino or something like that, or Gloria in Excelsis Deo. Or something. I can't remember the exact now. I haven't got the poem to hand. And then he, I said, I wouldn't go with them for fear. But perhaps if I had gone with them, I might have come to Bethlehem. Right. So that's the scenario, is that he's alone, it's dark, it's scary. So we can just look at any scenario in our lives now, right? Where the unknown is something which is daunting and worrying us. And then we have a vision of what we're called to be, right? Trusting, just go along with these people, right? And you'll end up with the Christ child in Bethlehem, but we don't. Or we're tempted not to, because we don't know where that's going. We don't know what we're going to have to leave behind. We don't know if we'll be able to come back again, right? So, are we burning bridges? So there's all sorts of reasons by which we can make excuses for not pursuing Christ with the courage that's necessary. This tension between faith and fear is something all of us deal with all the time.
Isn't that like, I'm thinking Frodo in Lord of the Rings when he says, "I'll take it. I'll take the ring." Um, he's a hobbit, and you have all you got the strong elves and the dwarves, and you got the men, and here's Frodo, and they're all arguing, going, "I'll take it." And it never struck me that he was just talking out of his what. Like, he sees what's going on, and he says, "I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to make this decision and do this." That's my thought, Joseph. What do you think?
Absolutely, and Tolkien deliberately makes the hobbits, small and physically speaking, apparently powerless. This is the ordinary small man, not the great, that are called to great things. And so that's the message together. Frodo knows that he's now found himself in a situation that the only true thing, the only good thing he can do, he has no real choice unless he's going to be a coward, right? He has to basically say, okay, I'm called to take up this burden, take up this cross, this ring. Even though I don't know where it's going to lead me, I don't know where I'm going. But clearly, this is what I'm called to do. And again, in our lives, I'll give you just an example from my own life. For instance, we didn't have any tests when we got married. We got both a little bit older when we got married during pregnancy. Because why? I mean, what if we discover, for instance, that our child had a Down syndrome, all it would do is take the joy out of the pregnancy. We're not going to kill the child, so what's the big deal, right? So, but our first son has Down syndrome and developed autism. That I remember that when that moment when I saw our son just after he was born, I could see from his features he had Downs, and immediately I said, "So be it." And it wasn't me, because I know me. I'm a selfish so and so, right? But there was an infusion of grace at that moment, just to accept and embrace the situation. And that's been an adventure. 23-year adventure with him so far, right? And it's a joy. We still don't really know where we're going. I mean, he's probably going to outlive us, right? So we're obviously doing all sorts of prudent things as we go, setting up a trust and making sure things are in place. But at some point, we'll probably be too old to look after him. But listen, we're on this journey, we're on this adventure. I'm not going to worry about things I can't do, I might not be able to do in the future. I'm going to take it day by day, and just trust in the Lord, and whatever crosses that we've got, ask Him to help us to carry them. And we have a very, very good marriage. We have a great family, and he's the happiest member of our family, and he makes us happy. It's a win-win-win. Yeah.
You know, I can't help but think in my mind, Joseph Pearce, is that the three of us, and there's many people out there, the three of us have that in common. Because Joe Rossinello, my brother-in-law, got married at 43 years old, and he constantly says on this show, and rightfully, He says, I just trusted in God, and he's got 5 kids. My wife early on told me and was honest with me and said she was going to have difficulty having children. And obviously, IVF was out of the question. All right. Like you're describing, like I'm describing, Joe, we made a decision, and I am not the Lord's bravest creature. Okay. I said, well, we'll adopt. And as you were talking about your own son, we have an adopted son who is the light of our lives. All right. We got him when he was 12 in New Jersey, and he's 16. And sometimes it's just a matter of saying, you know what? I know the right thing here. I know the right thing to do. It's like you said, it's that infusion of grace to which you have to respond. And my larger point in bringing this up is it's really not as difficult as you think it might be to
No,
respond to God, to
no,
respond to
no,
God's
I think
grace.
I think it's God basically. It's God's giving us the opportunity to man up. You know, that basically you are capable of much more than you think, which is all related to this faith and fear scenario. You know, that you're if you're not careful, fear will prevent you from being the man you're called to be. So you're presented with certain challenges, crosses, right? And you're called, even if you think it's too heavy, to shoulder that burden and ask God to help you carry it, and you then become astonished at how strong you can be with His help. But upon this, you have to overcome the fear, which you can also only do with His help. You know, in order to embrace that challenge, embrace that pilgrimage, take that cross. You know.
No, absolutely. Joseph Pearce joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Great books for good men, reflections on literature and manhood, available at Ignatius Press. You could also go to jpearce.co, Pearce.co, jpearce.co. And all of Joseph's work is on there. His blog, his books. Please avail yourself of Joseph Pearce and his work. We promise you're not going to be disappointed. Joe Resinello.
As you both were talking about that, I was thinking of like one of my favorite gospel stories. And I think men don't dwell on this enough, this story, because I think it's key. It's the story of Peter on the boat. He's the fisherman and he works all night and he fails. He catches nothing. And then Christ, the carpenter, says, but do it this way. Throw it on the other side. Now, if Peter was from New Jersey and he was Italian, he would say, I'm the fisherman. I know what I'm doing. But he's not from New Jersey and he's not Italian. So he says, okay, you said to do it this way, so I'm going to do it. And he catches tons of fish. I dwell on that a lot. That's one of my favorite stories because it doesn't make sense. It makes no sense to the world. Peter is skilled. He knows what he's doing. And he's told something that makes no sense. Like, say, be open to life. Be open to life. It makes no sense, in a sense, but it makes all the sense in the world. That story embodies, if you ask me, as Catholic men, we have to embrace the world in front of us. Dwell on that a little bit. That's how, as you guys were talking about, that's what comes to my head. I think about that in my own life a lot.
Yeah, well, you know that there's a reflection in the book about Shakespeare's play King Lear, and it's worldly wisdom versus holy foolishness, because that's basically what that play's about. Is that the fool is he all the advice is given makes absolute sense. You were stupid to give your power away. Now you're giving your power away. You were comfortable. Now you're uncomfortable. But the worldly wisdom is all about you've got to be wise is to make yourself as comfortable as possible. In other words, to be wise is to avoid the cross. To be wise is to find the path of least resistance through life. Right? Earn enough money to go and play on your yacht instead of doing stuff that's going to hurt. Right? That's worldly wisdom. But holy foolishness is basically saying, no, I'm going to become nothing so that I can become something. Right? The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. It's that realizing that in order to be who we're meant to be, we have to empty ourselves of all that prideful ambition, all that fear of suffering, and just to trust the Lord. And then when we do that, that's because that's when Lear symbolically strips himself naked on the heath during the storm. Well, that's what St. Francis of Assisi does. This is clearly an image that Shakespeare's presented to us there. When Francis of Assisi's father says, even the clothes on your back you owe me for, right? Francis of Assisi took all his clothes off and walked off naked into the woods, right? Is that, yes, I will become naked for Christ. I'm going to marry Lady Poverty, right? So that revolutionary understanding of what we're called to do is what, again, Peter. We can imagine St. Peter sort of grumbling under his breath, right? I've been out all night, goodness sake, But nonetheless, he's called to obedience, he's called to faith, and he trusts, no doubt grumbling, and then of course receives the grace, because that's what the fish, right, represent. You just receive this abundance of blessings if you trust.
In the Joseph Pearce joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. I pray the divine mercy every morning when I drive my son. We pray it together. And in the divine mercy, the ending prayer is eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible. I think sometimes, and now again, I'm not downplaying the negative power of sin, okay, and the attachment to sin. I'm not, but when I pray that, I remember it reminds me all the time that the Lord is infinitely merciful and He's compassionate. He suffers with us, okay, as we know. And we have to keep that in mind, and we have to look, and I think I'm using your words here, Joseph Pearce. We have to look, every man has to look sin in the eye. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, again, the meditation on that in the book is Dante. You talk about Dante very beautifully earlier, but that's what Dante's descent into the Inferno is in order for him to actually understand who he's meant to be. Because at the beginning of the Divine Comedy, he's trapped in the dark wood of sin. The dark wood of sin. He's having a midlife crisis. He's a middle-aged man. He can't see the light because he's in this dark wood. He can't escape the dark wood because of three ravenous beasts, each of which represent the seven deadly sins. So he's trapped by his own sinfulness. He can't get out, and he needs help, right? And it is the Blessed Virgin Mary, and through her intercession, that Virgil, the guide, is sent to him. But then he has to descend into hell. What's that mean? In order to be able to afterwards ascend Mount Purgatory, to have his sins forgiven and washed away penitentially, he has first of all understand what his sins are. What exactly is it to sin? So he has to go through and look at each of the seven deadly sins in the eye and see the destructive consequences of that sinfulness in order to be able to be then purged of that sin. In other words, if we don't know what sin is, how can we be sorry for it, right? How can we repent for it? We have to actually have the courage to see the destructive consequences of sinful behavior, and our own sins especially, because it begins with us, right? And then by the grace of God, because that's Virgil is the image of that, right? Someone's been sent to rescue Dante because he can't get out by himself. Through the grace of God, to look at our sins in the eye, and then ask for the strength to overcome them.
Absolutely. Joe Resinello, hate to put the time constraint on you, but we got about two and a half minutes left.
Perfect. We're going to talk about G.K. Chesterton. We got the picture of him right behind Joseph Pearce. What does he teach us about swimming upstream?
Yeah, one of Chesterton's wonderful aphorisms, he says, that a dead fish or a corpse can float downstream. It's only a living fish or a living man that can swim against the stream. In other words, that life is a struggle. To go with the flow ultimately leads to hell. Take the path of least resistance leads to hell. That we have to struggle against. Again, another Chesterton saying I also meditate on there. We don't want a church that will move with the world, that will go with the flow. We want a church that will move the world, right? So you don't just follow the spirit of the age and just go with it. That's what theological modernism is, right? It's a heresy. You fight against the spirit of the age, and the spirit of the age is antagonistic towards the Holy Spirit, right? So that means that the church militant, that's what we are, right? We're part of the church militant, the church at war. We are soldiers of Christ. It's a struggle, and we have to swim upstream because to allow ourselves to be taken downstream is the toxic mainstream, which leads to hell. So, but we can only do that with the grace of God and with the help of our brothers and sisters. So, love of God, love of God, love of neighbor. Without that, we cannot do it ourselves. We do it, if you like, as a team.
Absolutely. Joseph Pearce, what a great conversation. We love having you on the show. And these are all just so important ideas that you've discussed with here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Great books for good men, reflections on literature and manhood. Joseph, one more time for our audience, where can they find you, your work, and everything you have going on?
The best one-stop place for me is jpearce.co, jpearce.co.
Awesome. Joseph Pearce, write another book real quick so we can have you back. Or even not, just come back and we'll kind of like BS a little bit for about an hour. I'm sure we're gonna find something to talk about. Thank you so much, our brother. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. God bless both of you.
God bless you. And thank you all out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 1039 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. Please go out and buy Joseph's book, Great Books for Good Men, Reflections on Literature and Manhood. Follow Joe and I on social media if you would. If you like our content, help us get out to a wider audience. Like, subscribe, share on X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. Help us out a little bit. Thanks once again. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.